Okay. Good morning, good afternoon for those of us on the East Coast. We're going to do our timer here till we get started. It's about 30 seconds to see a bunch of people pouring in. So thank you for joining. Very happy to have you all here on what's a very cold day on the East Coast, the US and Canada. Maybe it's cold throughout the rest of the country too, but we were talking about groundhog as we were leading into this call. So hopefully winter's getting over soon, but okay, so here we go. Episode 4 in the Pulse webinar series by Red Iron, which is powering the next generation of retail observability. Today, we're talking about unified data capture. From a speaker standpoint, you'll have myself, who's the chief retail officer at Red Iron, Mike Wilson, as well as somebody, Jim from our retail practice, Jim Davidson, who's kind of been great here. Today we're going to do it, maybe just a little bit differently from a timing perspective. We're going to see more of the system and clicks, and actually how Pulse performs on the front line of retailers. I'm going to go through just a couple slides to talk about the product, talk about what we're going to see today, talk about, as we at Red Iron continue to go forward and talk about, challenges that retailers face and, things that our solutions, not just Pulse, but, the rest of the stack at Red Iron can help, whether it's from a project standpoint, whether it's from a product standpoint within our Pulse and broker solution, whether it's within our innovation services, how we're able to help retailers innovate, the long, very, long and successful history of Red Iron supporting retailers, supporting brick and mortar, being, a brick and mortar kind of first company, and thinking about, how we help retailers. A couple things, usually, preface us with Pulse can help your store level profitability, which is what most of us are going after, right? When you're a retailer, it helps from a technology standpoint. You can maximize the technology capital spend, so you can, do this value engineering, make your products that you have purchased last longer for you, and then, from a technology standpoint, IT help reduce that MTTR, MTTD. How fast do you get, issues resolved, and reduction of friction at checkout for your customers, which helps all those things that I talked about, but ends at the profitabilities of your store, which goes on your balance sheet, which helps your customer, your company be more profitable. So just quick, little history on the webinar series, where we're at to date. Hard to believe that we're at number 4. When we started on estate management and compliance in episode 1, it was an exciting roadmap that we had laid out, and really proud of the work teams at Red Iron have put into this to keep this going forward. We've gotten so much good feedback from participants. Done one-offs. We have a lot of retailers with questions and that are now on the Pulse journey, which is certainly very exciting. So estate management and compliance we covered in episode 1. Episode 2, we hit targeted observations and real-time monitoring. Episode 3, which was our last one prior to this one, was around events and smart event correlation. Today we'll be covering unified data capture, and Jim's going to talk a lot in this about different sources of these signals that come up from stores and how we kind of digest them as Pulse and make it easy for you to make operational decisions on. Just plug for the next one. It'll be exactly a month from today on March 6th. That one we're going to cover cross-platform support. So if you're in a hybrid estate, if you have a Windows and a Linux and a Droid or an iOS, any of those types of devices, Pulse is able to support, monitor, instrument, get that telemetry data. And then just kind of foundationally, right? Like, we at Red Iron have a strong belief that stores deserve observability as a basic. It very much observability started in the digital world, helping websites run, helping your third-party systems run. But we believe that it's a basic requirement for brick and mortar stores, and Pulse helps shift to why it matters, but also makes it real. The Pulse tool, not just it's not just another app that sits out there that does your log aggregation. It's actually shaping the market and building a category. And coming off of NRF, we had a lot of these valuable conversations with folks that were very interested in Pulse, aware of Pulse, want to learn more. So if you're a retailer or a partner that's on this call, we're very happy to do, a one-off to help walk you through the solution or any specific use case or questions or dive deeper. But I think today is going to be really good because Jim's going to go into pretty good depth in the tool. These are honeycombs, kind of the core fundamentals of the Pulse platform. On the right-hand side is really like the hierarchy of, how things happen in Pulse. We start at an issue, whether it's something happening in a store that's reported by a customer or follows your chain of command throughout your brick and mortar stores, or it's something that sits there that's undetected, which, is maybe acceptable in a non-peak scenario. You could have a register that's maybe not performing and not a ton of associates use it. But as you go into your peaks, you want those things, those registers, the peripherals, pin pads, scanners functioning all at 100%. Then it goes up through the chain into an observation. Then we track an event, and then we have a remediation. So that's the basic flow. As you and your retail teams, as Pulse gets installed in your environment, that's the kind of flow that it's going to follow. Okay, so today, unified data capture, just like a zoom in on that. And these are some of the core, kind of principles around unified data capture. But you're getting visibility in real time into your lanes. You're having access that's secure but centralized. So just think about a benefit there of, you don't have to enable remote access for every single person that needs to know what's going on in your stores. They would need Pulse access, and Pulse is that level of layer of intelligence, on top of it. Single source of truth for your environment, right? It becomes across your entire store tech stack. This is where you go to find out what's happening. Like, I want to know how we doing on, maybe something Jim's going to talk about, and we'll see it in the transaction response. How many timeout reversals have we had? How many technical fallbacks have we had? How many gift cards do we have today that failed activation? Those kind of things, being that single source of truth for you. And then, I talked in the opening a little bit about signal capture, right? So not just a singular view into how your registers are performing, or a singular view into how your third-party service providers, whether it's payment or loyalty or CRM, how they're performing. Having all these signals all in one place, EFT responses, your logs from your POS, anything that's in your store that's maybe not a register, right? Some of the club stores will have rollers and they'll have scales. In grocery, you have, refrigerators. There's this whole world of IoT that are cameras and, your access points, your all the layers of the OSI model in your network stack. How are we kind of capturing and putting all those in one place for you? So just, quickly into what we're going to see today in the demo, like some of the key points, just, I want everybody to think about, these are numbered, but there's certainly no specific order here. Rapid awareness for your ops and getting those answers quickly, right? Version and visibility within Drift. So everybody's done it. You have a register that gets introduced into your environment that maybe was sitting in a depot or was sitting in a store back office for a while. Now it comes online. The associates want to use it. What from a month, a week, it's been sitting there a year. What from when that register was last plugged in till now, what are the differences? What's required to bring it to a fully functional a register that has all of your, recent patches, upgrades, enhancements? Maybe, you're on an omni journey. How can you make sure that register doesn't, add friction at the checkout? Issue detection early. There's certainly a story, many stories, but one that comes to mind within Pulse from one of our retailers, an issue that typically would have, been a large scale outage in a large retailer. Pulse found the issue, kind of overnight and started sending the signals out and doing some of the healing of what it takes to get that issue fixed before there literally was impact on any even associate who came in early to open the store. So really good business benefits there when we talk about MTTR and MTTD. Frozen register, like that's kind of, one of my favorites. A lot of the, help desk issues. Oh, the register froze. Yep, register froze. So you go look at your, you start to split up your categories of root cause within your stores. It's like, okay, end result, frozen register. But there's a lot more detail that needs to go into that and determining that, right? Is it an issue with the pin pad? Is it an issue with, maybe the network jack that it's plugged into? Is there a scanner that's plugged in that's maybe behaving improperly? So that's important, right? Just going down to the next layers of details into the root causes of why things are happening. And then as you think about scale, if you have 1,000 registers, 5,000 registers, 20,000 registers, 100,000 registers, doing the economy of scale and the math across all of them, how do you make sure they're running at peak performance? Intelligence into your EFT, right? That's a big one. I say it all the time. and you've been on these webinars before, you certainly would have heard me talk about it. But how do you turn, and make sure that EFT is functioning properly always, because that's the base of any retailer who's trying to make money. DIP, authorization, response, settle, that's a clear and clean experience for your customers, but also your associates as well. There's less having to reboot, replug, do an RMA, stay on the phone with the help desk, trying to understand, is this an issue with a printer? Is this an issue with my hardware, my software? Pulse, kind of aggregates all that and helps you go faster there. Vendor accountability, always a big one. In my days, in the retail world, it was always like I would get responses, and I think Jim's certainly going to talk about this in a little bit, but we'd hear, the vendors would say, oh, yeah, the system's up. What are you seeing? And to chain it on that point, which Jim will also go into, is, was this the first time you saw it? How many registers is this happening at? When's the first time you saw it? So all of those answers that are kind of like very difficult to prove out, and not necessarily, a bad part of our third-party friends out there, but it's mostly about how do we get down quickly into what's happening and what's happened in our environment, so that some of those first, kind of level 1, level 2 questions when we're in an escalation get answered very quickly, and we can move on to figuring out, what's the root cause. So I think that was my last slide here until we jump into the demo. So Jim, I'm going to turn it over to you. Certainly folks are going to hear from me still throughout this demo, because I'll be popping in. I got your screen up going there, Jim, so have a way. Thank you.
All right. So welcome everyone. Here we have our feature management screen. A feature is simply a way to group information into logical units. So I have groups based on different applications and by operating system, for example. So within each feature, you define what archive or information is collected. And everyone gathers information in a variety of ways. And so whether we're reading something in a newspaper or magazine, we see something on the web, through social media, just through conversations with others, we collect information from many sources, and sometimes that information comes to us in multiple languages. And so same for Pulse. Pulse has lots of ways to collect information, and we refer to that as an archive. And so if we take a look in here, I have some archives defined, and I'm going to click on this add here. And so here I'm showing a list of all of the archive collectors, and it's how Pulse can collect data. So Pulse can monitor log files, it can execute scripts from command line, it can examine configuration files, it can run registry queries, look for event viewer notifications, be it on Windows, Linux, or Android OS. Pulse provides a uniform platform to consume information from all these sources into one pane of glass. So let's have a look at our first one here, retail error log. And so this is how we define this particular archive. And so you give it a name and a description, what the log name is, and you can see I've got an asterisk at the end of that line. So in this case, the log is rolling over .1, .2, .3 kind of thing every 10 megs or whatever. We give it a file location, and then we have some values here, so frequency. So this is how often the Pulse client is looking in this archive for new information and sending that to our cloud server. And then the server retention is how many days do we wish to keep that information available in our cloud, okay? And so now, for any archive, you're going to create a match, and it's going to define either an observation or a property. And an observation will be things like error messages, network timeouts, that kind of thing. And a property is a more static piece of information, things like an application version or a hardware serial number or operating system information. And so if we look at Fluid Pause version, for example, here I've set it up. This is a property that I'm capturing. And if I go in here a little deeper into our expression builder, it's looking for build number in the log, and then I've got a definition to pull out what that build number is, okay? And if I take a look at IO exception, this here is an observation that's looking for timeouts to a particular cloud server. So this
And
type of
Jim,
observation.
that's one that, like, just for the folks on the phone, your estates all probably look very different. And even within a retailer, estates themselves can look very different. And, an IO exception is something that happens whether you're running on Android, whether you're running on Linux, whether you're running on Windows, doesn't matter who your payment provider is, doesn't matter who you use for loyalty. And those kind of things create churn and friction within your checkout, right? So the point is, this tool is not really tied to any specific stack or any specific provider, whether it's software or hardware or third party. And these are the type of things. This is just like a very, very, very simple example with Impulse, but these are the kind of things that will track within the system that help you, go back to that store level profitability, but also reduce the friction at checkout for your customers.
Yeah, and to that point, Mike. So this particular observation helped an existing Pulse customer because they were seeing a huge uptick in the frequency of this exception, and they reached out to the vendor, whose immediate response was, "No, the server's up and running." But on further examination, it turned out, yeah, it was running, but the queue was backing up tremendously, and so the early warning from Pulse allowed them to remedy that situation before it became a much bigger problem. Okay. If we go back here, I'm going to take a look at another archive. So this is under ORIS. So this is an EFT provider, and we can see it's very similar in its definition of what it's pulling out. And if we look into the matches for this, so again, it's a mix of, I'm looking for different error conditions or things happening, but I've also got some property information. What I want to look at is something we call transaction responses. And so Mike had alluded to this earlier. So this is every response that our EFT provider is sending back to POS. And I am pulling out a variety of different what we call attributes. So card type, response code, response text, how the card was entered, fallback indicators, transaction type and amount, all of these things that I'm pulling out of that. And what this allows me to do is we can create what we call child observations. And a child observation is made up of one or more of those attributes that we pulled out of the transaction response. So for example, gift card activation failure. So in this case, I'm going to take the card type attribute, GCC, combine that with, in this case, this pattern. So in this case, I'm introducing a new gift card bin out into the field. And so this range, I want to see that, we're not having any problems activating this new card range. And
And
so
I
I
think,
look,
Jim, just one thing on this, right? Depending upon the retailer, some folks have a dedicated payment team in their IT staff, right? Like they may have a bunch of people that understand payments within their organization. Other retailers might not. And we're okay in actually either scenario because, in the scenario where you have it, that's great. We can partner together. If your payments team, if an expert payment team, but if you don't have a team that understands payments, there's lots of people at Red Iron that really understand that can help you, when your Pulse is installed, help you derive a lot of these things and say, if you start to hear from your field, hey, we're getting a lot of gift card activation failures. Can Pulse help us see like where they're happening and how many times? The Red Iron team will jump right in and help be able to create one of these observations for you. So it's totally, optional. If you want it and you want to create it and put these in on your own, well, you can go ahead and do that. You don't need a lot of help from Red Iron once Pulse is installed. But if you have Pulse installed and there are these specific things that you need help on, leverage, the 26 years and, large amount of projects Red Iron's delivered successfully with all of our knowledge to help, build these kind of observations to make your business run smoother.
and so, yeah, so in this case, we're looking for the card type and the receipt token, a response code not equal to our 5 zeros, and the transaction type 41. That comprises a gift card activation failure. And so you can see the more of these attributes that you pull out of an observation, you can create some very powerful child observations to get you some very granular data. So next I'm going to switch over here. And so here I'm going to go into our Linux guy here. So here's a bunch of examples of different command line collectors. And so our host and version guy, it's running a very simple hostname CTL command. And then from that, I've got 4 different elements, if you will, or properties that I'm pulling out. So I'm pulling out hostname, kernel, machine ID, and system information, right? And so if I look at one of these, this is that's the output from that hostname CTL command. And in this case here, I'm pulling out the operating system information, okay? So that's a very simple command, a base command for Linux systems. But you can do so much more with the command line collector. And so a good example of that is we have a customer who they were running out of wireless registers from their vendor for break fix replacements. And so I knew the customer had a great many stores that were set up wireless during their initial deployment of their hardware refresh. But over the years, they have transitioned those to wired stores. And so I came up with a command line collector that would tell us, okay, which stores have wireless capable registers, but they're not using them as wireless. They are now wired. And so that's what this register wireless IP status guy. And if we take a look at that, it's a big
Jim,
honking command.
Yep. Just one thing here like that's really important just to think about, because a lot of retailers that I know and folks I've talked to, in my daily travels here and prior to Red Iron, that might be like, oh, we need to take a survey at the store and they need to go check something on a register and then fill out a form or fill out a Google sheet or send an email. And then somebody on the back end's like aggregating all those things. And you're never going to be 100% precise there. Just to frame what you did there, you had a business problem, you entered a command into Pulse, that went out and got all the data from the registers and put it in one place for you to see the results, and probably almost pretty immediately, right? So, if you think about that and put your retailer hat on, how much time that saves being able to do that, and that's like a very 0.05% easy example of how easy it is in Pulse. But you can enter commands here inside Pulse, have it go out to your whole estate, and then take the data back into like a consumable format for you to be able to make operational decisions on. So I just want to pull that, frame through that, Jim. I know from a time perspective, we're at 22 minutes after, and that might be looked at like as a very fast kind of thing, and it is very fast within Pulse. But in a non-Pulse world, there's a lot of moving parts to be able to, get down to that level of data.
So just to kind of skip ahead here, so let's, you've taken the time, you've defined all of the ways that you want to gather data, you've defined those observations and properties. So, how does that, then transform? So if we take a look at the dashboard, so this is the kind of information that you get here. Okay, so I can tell that, my POS version, that the vast majority of my stores are running the latest and greatest, but I've got a whole set of stores that are still on an older version that I can deal with. Okay, so for any of these charts, you can drill down and see what nodes makes up that that value. Okay, so again, I've got most of my pin pads are running the latest and greatest, but I've got one device out there that's not, right? And that wireless IP that I was talking about, so I identified, in this case, I've got 5 lanes out there that have wireless, but they're not using wireless. So their opportunity to replace them with a wired unit and then put this inventory to replenish my break fix. Okay. We talk, so here's the scenario. So I got operating system, I got service pack 3 and service pack 4 mix out there. That might be by design. Maybe I'm going through an upgrade. It might be because maybe my gold image got changed and all of a sudden service pack 4 got introduced unbeknownst. But and then on my pause restarts, I want to show you why it's important to collect all of these properties. And so I've got a restart chart here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here and I can create filters for different properties, and I've already predefined some of these. So I've got a Linux Service Pack 3, and I'm going to go in here and add this guy, and this one's going to be on Service Pack 4, and I say OK. And so now you see my chart here, and the darker line, darker at the bottom is Service Pack 4 frequency. So over here, it's about a 2-to-1 ratio, Service Pack 3 to Service Pack 4. But that ratio is a lot more than 2-to-1 here. So, if you were in the middle of deploying Service Pack 4, that's great, because these restarts are probably going to come down in a good cadence, right? So that's how you can use it. And now, if I drill down into, and I want to find how many restarts have happened in this time frame, I can see all the nodes and their frequency. What I can do is I can drill down into this count, and I can look and I can see, when they've been recorded. If I take a look at the archive, so I've got an online viewer of the log. And I can see, I can add, lines before and after, but I've got an ability to look at the logs directly without having to go through all the jump boxes and security required for me to directly access lanes, right? It's all at my fingertips. And one last thing, because we're getting close on time, is if I want to take a deeper dive into one of these pause restarts on a lane, I can come up here and click download archives, and I can say select all archives, and I can download. And let me just shorten up this name here a bit. And click here. And what I get is I get a zip file of all of the different archives, bits, log files, other information that was gathered at the time of this event, right? And so that's one click that I've gone out and I've got all that data at my disposal. I didn't have to tell somebody, here's the list of things that I want. Pulse already has that at the ready for you. So I think I'll wrap it up right there. I'll pass it back to Mike.
Sure. So let me just share. I got a couple questions in here, so we're going to try to pick. So let's go through. Let me just make sure that I'm sharing here. We're going to have a quick reminder on the next webinar episode, and we take a look at 2 questions. So, all right, Jim, maybe you help with this question. The question is, seems like a lot of data is being captured and sent to the cloud. What if my store's network's not very robust? I can't impact the daily operation at the store. How do you throttle that?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So we scan the data at each node or register or whatever machine you have on a pretty high frequency. We recommend every 5 or 10 minutes. And what that does is, when it keeps the packets smaller, but we also have a compression that turns out to be about 50-to-1. And what we've seen with a high volume retailer doing a 5-minute frequency, and they've got a lot of archives that they are uploading, that in that 5 to 6 minute interval, we're sending about 30 kilobytes, 20 to 30 kilobytes on average to the cloud server in that. So, it keeps the footprint small, but we also have the ability to have blackout periods. So if you don't want, if you've got bandwidth issues at certain locations and you want to segregate them differently, then we can create blackout periods and do the data transfer during off hours.
I think the important part of that is we only track deltas. If a file hasn't changed, we won't report on it. There's no reason to. So it's very relatively small chatter when you think about, the volume of operations that are happening in your store. Second question that I got, do these alerts go out to the user base, or do you have to log into Pulse? So I think just the answer there, and we covered this in one of the earlier episodes, there's a couple ways you can take feedback out of Pulse and alerting. You can get an email, You can get an SMS. We can trigger a webhook. We can do file operations. We can also run local scripts at each node that's having an issue to kind of help do correction there. So multiple ways. And, the longer answer to that question, you don't have to be logged into Pulse. You don't have to have a Pulse account to be able to, alert and, expose a lot of the things that are going on within the system. So last thing, we're trying to end right at 12:30 on the East Coast here, but Friday, March 6th, please sign up, please join, please engage with us, please ask questions. We're very happy to help. Contact info@rediron.tech, or you can email, the who you talk to on a regular basis. Email me, email Jim. We're happy to talk. Episode 5 will be cross-platform support. So we're going to be talking about all the fun topics around Windows, Droid, Linux, and anything else that, you folks could throw at us that we're happy to solve. So appreciate it. Happy Friday.